Today we have an update in the Bricks and Minifigs case, the Lego scandal involving Reckless Ben and Bricks and Minifigs over there in Utah. And this is actually a really big update because the federal judge has stepped in and thrown out the provisions that are holding back Reckless Ben. So for those that have been following this saga, as we have, obviously you're familiar with Ben, the content creator, and he's been waiting to put out more content on Bricks and Minifigs, on this Lego scandal, stuff he's already done, he's already produced, he's already put his own time, his own effort, his own energy into creating this part 3 and coming even part 4, or so he says. But now he's actually able to speak. So here's actually the context and what happened. The real background is Ben removed his case. He took the case from state court and moved it up to federal court. So he went up to that higher level. He went up to those different rules of procedure. So you're talking about a whole different ball game for Ben now, moving up into federal court, getting upgraded. And because of that, on July 6, 2026, U.S. District Court Judge David Barlow, this is a federal judge, granted the joint motion and amended the gag order, amended the temporary restraining order. And as part of that, so as part of that amendment that is now official, it's now out there, he is explicitly allowed to permit him to do commentary and investigative journalism. This is a massive win for the First Amendment, because if a business was allowed to continue to restrict somebody that's doing investigative journalism, that's doing commentary, they can essentially silence people that they don't want to say things. So essentially a company in the United States would be able to say, I don't like you. I don't like what you're saying. I'm going to go to a judge. I'm going to come up with some bunk story, some total BS, some sort of exaggeration. And based on that exaggeration, I'm going to silence you. I'm going to gag you. I'm going to put a temporary restraining order on you because of that the thing that I just made up. You'd be able to just pull it out of nowhere. And the judge here is saying, no, you're actually going to have to go to court. You're going to have to prove these allegations, right? Because Bricks and Minifigs has made a lot of allegations about Ben, saying that he is a bad faith actor, that he's a bad person, etc. And because of that, they're now actually saying, no, you're going to have to prove that. And he is allowed to go out and do his thing and actually do journalism, which is, I think, a massive win. Before we get into the rest of this, I've got an important message for you guys. Recently, a jury ordered Meta and YouTube to pay millions for their role in designing and promoting addictive platforms. They knew their apps could contribute to anxiety, depression, and body image issues, but did not share those risks while prioritizing profits. The recent historic verdict underscores the consequences of those decisions. If you or your child spent years growing up on social media and experienced serious mental health struggles, you should hear this. Morgan & Morgan is stepping up to hold these platforms accountable for the harm they caused. You can use the link in my description or scan the QR code to take a short quiz to see if you qualify for a case. You may be entitled to a potential recovery of over $1,000. Okay, so let's get into Reckless Ben's opinion here and exactly what he has been covering in this case and why it's so important that now he can speak. So let's hear his own words.
1 month ago, I was wrongfully silenced.
I am no longer allowed to even mention this mystery company.
But today, I got my freedom of speech back.
I have my freedom of speech back, baby.
Okay, I want to say real quick here, and this is really good filming, and obviously, I mean, I think this looks like he actually climbed up a tower with a drone shot. But let me ask a question here. And this is the question I think a lot of people are thinking. Did you trespass to get up in that tower? Or did you have permission to go up in that tower, Ben? Here's the thing. And this is the thing that Ben's got to be careful of. Because Ben, he seems like a guy who goes out there and does it. It's in his name, Reckless Ben. But I'm looking at him on this tower like, okay, if you're actually going out there and climbing towers, you gotta get permission to do that. You gotta go out there. I'm just saying that's the sort of thing that Ben's got to be careful of in the future, because Ben at this point is under a microscope. So he has to make sure he's not doing things like trespassing, like vandalizing, like harassment. He's got to be a journalist, right? He's got to put on the journalism hat and say, hey, I'm doing this from a journalistic standpoint. point, because the last thing you want to do is give your opponent, give them something to use against you. And that's just me being honest about the law on this objectively, because as you guys know, I always cover the objective law and try to be very fair when I'm analyzing these things. But let's hear what he has to say.
I can say whatever I want. I can say bricks and minifigs sucks. I can say bricks and minifigs still support people. And look, I just said it. I'm not in jail, which is sick. We got our First Amendment right back. Yeah.
Episode 3.
Yeah, and that's something he needs to be very careful of. So he can say, okay, now is, bricks and minifigs steals from old people. He's implying about the theft of the Legos, but he's got to be careful about defamation and defaming these businesses and defaming the people at this point, because he's under a microscope now. So he's going out there and defaming them and saying things that aren't technically true, calling them criminals on certain matters that maybe they aren't. Maybe it was just them being dumb. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was them being greedy, but that doesn't necessarily make them criminals. He's got to be very careful with his language. But yeah, you can say they suck, and that's totally permissible. You can say they're, horrible company. You can say all that sort of stuff. That's the First Amendment. That's what's awesome about this, and being able to speak up and have an opinion, even though it's negative. You should be able to have a negative opinion about somebody, but you do need to be careful for stuff like defamation, particularly when there's a lawsuit out there.
It's live right now on Patreon, so check it out. If you don't want to subscribe to Patreon, then you can always just wait until it's on YouTube in a couple days, but it's live. And also you can check out episode 4 coming very soon.
So really cool there news from Reckless Ben. Obviously, if you're over a fan of his Patreon, get over there. I think that's a pretty smart business model to put his stuff up on Patreon a couple days early, and then people can go get that and have that released. That's pretty smart, actually, in terms of content creator strategy. So in my judgment, wrapping this thing up, Ben can now speak, but he has to proceed carefully. So he is in a situation where he needs to proceed very, very carefully, because what he says will be used against him in court. And if a lot of people, especially content creators, they don't realize that their statements online can be used against them in court, can be used by law enforcement. So for example, if he was to say something that was threatening or anyway make some sort of specific threat, that could be used against him, and people could take that statement, that public statement, and use that against him. So that's a very interesting perspective that's got to be obeyed there. He needs to obey the laws and avoid defamation. That is critical for him to obey the laws, stay away from defamation. But I think it's a big win for the freedom of speech. I think it's a big win for the First Amendment, for investigative reporting. And I very much am looking forward to seeing part 3, part 4, and what Ben has to bring. But I want to know what you guys think in the comments below, and I will catch you on the next one.